Mumbai, September 2023. Imagine the monsoon season just ended, the city's alive, there's a buzz in the air, and in the middle of all the bustling streets and dreams, a young woman, Rupal Ogrey, was building a future for herself. She was training to be an air hostess, living with her siblings, working hard, and just radiating this infectious joy. But then, her story takes a dark turn, a turn that shocked the city, everyone who knew her.
It's a case that stays with you, this bright light, gone way too soon, and it makes you really think about the world, about the darkness hiding in the ordinary.
It does. It really does. This is CrimePod Castle's Twisted Love series, and today we're diving deep into the Rupal Ogrey murder case. You listeners have sent in so much police reports, court documents, psychological analyses, and we're here to try to make sense of it all.
Going through all this, it's striking how easy it would be to just see this as another tragedy, another headline. But when you really look closer, there's a chilling story here about obsession, about vulnerability, about a system that failed to protect a young woman who had so much potential.
Okay, so let's start with Rupal. What do we know about her? What was she like?
Everything points to her being an incredible person, full of life, hardworking, independent, cheerful, the kind of person who could light up a room. She moved to Mumbai from Chhattisgarh to chase her dreams. She wanted to make her family proud. And it's just devastating to see how those dreams were cut short.
It's like this stark contrast, isn't it? This vibrant young woman, so full of life, and then this dark reality of what happened to her.
Exactly. And that's what makes this case so hard to really process. On one hand, you have Rupal, this image of hope and ambition. And then on the other, there's the man who took her life, Sachin Singh, a 35-year-old maintenance worker at her apartment complex.
And this wasn't a random act of violence, was it? From what I've read, there was history there, a pattern of behavior that ended in a terrifying way.
That's right. The reports show a pattern of Sachin developing this unhealthy fixation on Rupal. He had a position of power, he had access to her building, her personal space, and he started to use that power to try to get close to her.
So he was using his job as a cover to stalk her.
It really seems that way. He would linger around her apartment, try to talk to her, and witnesses say he would stare at her, sometimes make inappropriate comments.
It's scary to think that these everyday interactions could be hiding something so dark. Did Rupal ever try to address his behavior?
As far as we can tell, she tried to keep things professional. She was polite but firm, made it clear she wasn't interested, but that only seemed to make his obsession worse.
That's when it gets really unsettling, doesn't it? Someone's behavior getting more intense, despite clear signs it's not welcome.
Absolutely, and unfortunately it happens way too often.
So tell us about that night. What happened?
It was September 24th. Rupal was alone in her apartment. Her siblings were out. Sachin, pretending there was a maintenance issue, got into her apartment. He saw it as his chance.
He deliberately targeted her when she was vulnerable.
According to his confession, once he was inside, he made advances towards Rupal. And when she rejected him, his obsession turned to rage. He attacked her with a weapon, killing her instantly.
It's awful. What happened after the attack?
He ran, left behind a horrifying scene, but he didn't get away for long. The Mumbai police were very quick in their investigation. They gathered evidence, reviewed CCTV footage, talked to witnesses, and it became clear that Sachin was their prime suspect.
So they built a strong case against him.
The evidence was overwhelming. The murder weapon, with his fingerprints and her blood on it, CCTV footage putting him at the scene, witnesses who had seen his strange behavior towards Rupal.
Did he try to deny any of it?
Eventually, he confessed, admitted that his obsession with Rupal and the anger he felt when she rejected him drove him to kill her. It's a confession that reveals how delusional he was and the terrible consequences of his actions.
It's hard to even imagine what Rupal's family went through, finding out about her death, and then the details of what happened. It wasn't just random, it was deliberate, brutal, all because of his obsession.
It is, and that's where this becomes more than just a crime story. It makes us ask bigger questions about responsibility, about how we can see and address these dangerous behaviors before they turn into violence.
That's important. But before we get into that, what happened next? The trial, the verdict, what was the outcome?
The trial was big news. The whole country was watching. It brought the dangers of stalking and harassment into the spotlight, started important conversations about the vulnerability of women.
I imagine the prosecution had a strong case with all the evidence they had gathered.
They did. They presented a thorough case, there was no doubt. But the defense, surprisingly, tried a different approach. Instead of denying the murder, they tried to say it was a crime of passion.
A crime of passion. How could they justify that?
They argued that Sachin was so in love with Rupal that he acted without thinking in a moment of overwhelming emotion because she rejected him. They tried to portray him as someone driven to desperation by unrequited love, someone who just snapped under pressure.
That's a bold strategy considering the evidence against him. Did the jury believe it?
We'll talk about the trial and what happened next when we come back. But for now, let's take a moment to think about what we've learned about Rupal, about Sachin, and how his obsession turned into something so awful. Welcome back to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Love series. We've been digging into the heartbreaking case of Rupal Ogrey, her life cut short, taken by a man driven to murder by his obsession.
Yeah, it's been tough going through everything you sent over. Before we get back to the courtroom, I think we need to stop and think about something you said earlier. This isn't just one crime, it's part of a bigger problem.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people, especially women, they know this feeling. That unease when someone's attention crosses a line, but you don't know when it's truly dangerous.
Start small, right? A look, a comment. It's tough to know when to be worried.
Exactly. That's why understanding stalking and obsession is so important. It's not always like in the movies.
So let's break it down. What are the warning signs, the subtle things someone might do that could turn dangerous?
A lot of times people don't see the pattern of unwanted attention. It's not one thing, it's the fact that it keeps happening even when it's clear it's not welcome.
Like with Sachin. Even though Rupal tried to keep her distance, he didn't stop.
Right, and it can look different. Unwanted calls, texts, emails, showing up at places they go.
It feels like someone's in your space, even if they haven't hurt you physically.
Yeah. Another warning sign is not being able to handle rejection. If someone gets angry, makes threats, or becomes more intense when they're told no, that's a huge red flag.
It means they're not respecting boundaries,
Yeah.
that they feel entitled to your attention.
Exactly. And sometimes that goes along with trying to isolate the victim to cut them off from their support network.
So they're more vulnerable, more dependent on the person controlling them.
Exactly. So seeing these signs early is key. And knowing what to do is just as important.
I think people might be unsure. Like, should I report this? Am I overreacting? What should someone do if they're in that situation?
First, trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Write everything down, dates, times, exactly what happened. If you need to take legal action later, this can help.
That's a good point. Having that record, that timeline is powerful.
Really is. And don't be afraid to get help. Talk to friends, family, or a counselor. They can support you and help figure out what to do.
What about going to the police?
That's a personal choice. There's no right or wrong answer. But remember, you have options. The police can be helpful, especially if there are threats or things are escalating.
But even beyond what individuals can do, I
Yeah.
feel like we need a change in how we, as a society, deal with stalking and harassment.
I agree. We need to challenge the attitudes that minimize these things or make it the victim's responsibility to protect themselves.
Like that boys will be boys idea.
Exactly. These actions need to be taken seriously. Victims should feel safe to speak up, and those who do these things need to be held responsible.
That starts with education, right? Teaching young people about healthy relationships, consent, respecting boundaries.
Definitely. And it goes further, challenging those old gender stereotypes that contribute to violence against women.
It's not just individual responsibility, it's about everyone feeling safe and respected.
Exactly. It's complicated, but it's a conversation we need to have. As we've seen in RuPaul's case, staying silent can have terrible consequences.
You're right. Let's go back to the trial. You mentioned the judge had some powerful things to say when he sentenced Sachin. What message was he sending, not just to him, but to everyone?
I think he wanted to make a point about accountability and the need for change. He wanted to send a message. Violence against women won't be tolerated, and people who do these things will face consequences.
I imagine he also wanted to acknowledge how this tragedy affected everyone, not just Rupal and her family, but the community as a whole.
Absolutely right. He talked about the fear and trauma Sachin caused, not just to RuPaul, but to so many women who live with the threat of harassment and violence. He wanted to validate those fears to make it clear the justice system is there to protect them.
So it was a call to action, in a way, a call for all of us to be more aware, more proactive in dealing with these issues and making the world safer for women.
Exactly. And that's a message that goes beyond the courtroom, a message each of us needs to think about and act on.
Well said. Speaking of action, I want to know more about what people can do to protect themselves and others. Because knowledge is power, right? The more we know about this, the better we can intervene.
Couldn't agree more. And that's what we're going to talk about next time. We'll explore practical ways to identify and address stalking and harassment, and we'll discuss the resources that are available to help victims and hold those responsible accountable.
Stay with us. This conversation could literally save lives. Back again on CrimePod Castle's Twisted Love series. We've been through so much with the Rupal Ogrey case, confronting the dark side of obsession, stalking, and the ways these patterns are allowed to continue.
It has been tough, going through all the details, trying to find meaning in something so senseless. But now, in this final part, I think it's time to shift focus, to move from the darkness to what we can do as individuals, as a society, to create a world where tragedies like this are less and less common.
Because it's not just one case, is it? It's not about one perpetrator, one victim. It's about a culture that ignores these behaviors,
Yeah.
that makes the vulnerable responsible for protecting themselves.
You're absolutely right. That's what makes this conversation so important. It's about knowledge, seeing the red flags, and knowing how to step in, how to act.
Let's talk about the practical side. What can people do if they're in a situation that feels threatening, unsafe?
Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't ignore those feelings of unease. Don't tell yourself you're overreacting.
Because sometimes our instincts are telling us something's wrong, even if we don't fully understand it yet.
Exactly. And when you recognize those feelings, start writing things down. Keep a record, a timeline of everything that worries you, dates, times, specific actions, anyone who saw it happen.
That record, that timeline, can be really important later on.
It's crucial. It helps you understand the situation, and it can be important if you need to go to the police or take legal action.
That makes sense. But I think a lot of people might hesitate to make a report, especially early on, if the behaviors haven't gotten that serious yet.
I get that. People worry they won't be taken seriously, that they'll be told they're overreacting, or even that things could get worse if they report it.
And honestly, the system doesn't always respond the way we want it to.
True. But even if you're not ready to involve law enforcement, reach out to someone, talk to friends, family, a counselor. They can listen, they can help you understand what's happening and guide you.
That support system can be so important because these situations can be isolating. They can really drain you emotionally.
Absolutely. Just saying it out loud, having someone acknowledge your fear can make a huge difference.
So what if someone's documented things, talked to people they trust, but it keeps getting worse? When do you say it's time to call the police?
If there are any direct threats, if the person shows up at your house or work uninvited, if you're scared for your safety, you need to contact the police.
And even if it hasn't gotten to that point, but it's constant and it's really upsetting you, it's still worth thinking about reporting it.
Absolutely. Stalking and harassment are crimes, and you have the right to feel safe.
And by reporting it, you're not only protecting yourself, but you might stop them from hurting someone else.
You're right. It's about ending the cycle, showing that these behaviors have consequences.
But beyond individual actions, we need to talk about bigger changes, right? Addressing the root causes of this kind of violence.
Completely agree. We have to look at the norms, the power dynamics, the messages in our culture that minimize stalking and harassment, or even just dismiss them.
It's those deep-rooted gender stereotypes, isn't it?
Yeah.
The ones that teach boys they have a right to a woman's attention, that equate aggression with being a man, that silence women when they try to speak up.
Exactly. We need to change those stories, promote healthy relationships built on respect and equality, and create a culture where consent is not just an idea, but something we actually live by.
And that starts with education, teaching young people about healthy boundaries, about seeing those red flags, about respecting other people's choices.
Absolutely. Open, honest conversations, even about tough topics. The more we talk about this, the more normal these conversations become. The less power those harmful behaviors have.
It's about building a world where everyone feels safe, respected, and able to speak out against what's wrong.
Exactly. The outpouring we saw after what happened to Rupal, all the grief, the anger, it shows that awareness is growing, that people want change.
It reminds us that even in the face of tragedy, there's hope. And that hope comes from what we do, from our commitment to building a world where stories like Rupal's are a thing of the past.
Beautifully said. As we finish our deep dive into this case, I want to leave everyone with a thought. Change begins with each of us. It starts with our conversation, our choices, how we treat one another. Let's honor Rupal's memory by fighting for change, by speaking up against what's wrong, by working together to create a world where everyone can live without fear.
Thank you for joining us on this tough but important journey. Remember, you're not alone. There are resources, people who care, and a whole movement working towards a better future.
If you've been affected by the things we've talked about today, please reach out for help. Don't be ashamed to ask for support. There are people who want to listen and help you find your way.
Don't forget to follow and subscribe to CrimePod Castle and our YouTube channel for more deep dives into true crime and these crucial conversations. Stay safe, stay informed, and keep talking about these issues.